Happy 4th of July and happy Intelligence Day, everybody, and welcome to a very special Intelligence Day episode of Tectonic, the AI Thought Show with Cousin Scott. I'm Scott Wolfson, your friendly neighborhood curious human, joined as ever and as always by my best friend and partner in possibility, Kez and Panther, the Centaurian himself. Kez, cheers to making it halfway through 2025. Doink! Look at that. You bring the tech, I got the tonic. Well, we've been busy, Kez. It has been quite a year so far. And one of the things that we do love to do on Tectonic is kind of tie everything together for folks, because the last time we did Tectonic was on December 31st of last year. That was the last live one. And then, of course, we did the extra special Aidan McCullen one, the reinvented Tectonic, on January 1st of this year. But let's take a step back and let's tie everything together with the dude's rug and the old school graphics from Dolly. You know, what an upgrade we have gotten. You know, we did a little Centaurian focus group for the new intro graphics, courtesy of VO3, and this one was voted. Yep. Tell you what, graphic artists, AI is still not a threat of taking your job. But before we dive into the mid-year independent thought holiday special of Tectonic, because tie everything together for folks. What is it? What is Tectonic all about? We started this January 12th of last year to piggyback on your weekly Centaurian Substacks. What in the heck are we doing? Why have we done this to ourselves so many times? And why haven't we been on for a little while? Can you just tie things together for folks before we dive into unpacking?
Look, we started Tectonic because we saw the advancing disruption of AI. So, you know, a lot of my background is, you know, deep research in AI 30 plus years ago, all the way to understand neuroscience and human behavior. And I realized that I was at this interesting intersection between brains and AI. And I felt like this was a time which was that insights from that were needed more than ever before. So we started Tectonic to be able to bolster a lot of the thought and research I was doing on my Centaurian Substack. So as I was unpacking all this research, understanding what the implications were for brains, understanding how AI was working, what could we do? That intersection of humans and machines has been the heart of what we've been doing. And so Tectonic grew out of this idea of like, how do we share and unpack a lot of the research? How do we actually help people translate what is happening? Because the pace of these technologies as they're coming out, like you talked about VO and the videos, right? We've seen from go back and look at the early DALL-E stuff. Go back and look at the Mid-Journey stuff, the stuff which was filling all our LinkedIns and our Instagrams, and look at what is happening today. You know, the multi sort of device systems which we have today, the ability to speak and take photos and videos, but really the power of AI as it drives forward. Look, you know, strong opinions loosely held, a free one for you up front. You know, I'm still not worried about AGI. I'm far more interested in how this AI is helping us think. But guess what? We've got some really interesting things, some research coming out showing that people aren't really thinking with machines anymore. So the reason for the show is to help people translate everything which is going on far too fast to be able to help them navigate this really unprecedented time.
And one of the things that we've done to help people navigate all along has been something that you call unpacking. And while we have typically unpacked your Centaurian Substacks, and here, as you were just saying, you can see some of the examples already of the delta between some of the last year's videos from Sora and from Runway and some of those, and then some of these amazing videos from VO3, from the deep minds at Google and Gemini. But we are going to unpack today, and what we're going to unpack is something a little bit different. It's not one of your Substacks. It is a an academic paper. And this is something that you spent a lot of time doing as you were writing your Substacks last year. You've continued to do that throughout this year in all the work that we've been doing. And this particular paper from Barbara Oakley, Terrence Sinowski, and a few others, we're huge fans of Barbara Oakley's, because tee this up for folks, and then we're actually going to jump into some slides to really unpack the memory paradox and what Barbara Oakley brought to light with her co-authors in this paper.
Look, as you say, I spent a lot of time reading neuroscience papers, AI papers over the last couple of years, really starting to fill the gaps. Look, this idea that brains and machines working together, and I wasn't the only one running at this. So as big fans of Barbara Oakley, the fact that she dropped this pre-release of a chapter literally a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, shows that there's a lot of really smart people running at this. And this particular paper, which actually in the sources, like I've read this now 3 or 4 times, unpacked it with AI, put it back together, created some thought leadership out of it. But really, it fitted the last jigsaw puzzle in a journey I have been on for the last literally 30 plus years, trying to work out, like, what is it about AI? So going back, way back machine to, the PhD I was working on AI, and eventually getting to this idea that it's like, hey, instead of artificial intelligence, we want intelligence augmentation. At which point I had to understand intelligence more. Look, what Barbara Oakley did spoke to so many different questions and tied together finally this last piece of something I've been researching, which is this concept of, if this AI commoditizes knowledge and democratizes expertise. As consultants, which we have been for a long time, that a sort of a really big disruption to a world which we've lived in, the knowledge era. 70% of the workforce are knowledge workers. This idea that knowledge working and the knowledge era is coming to an end, because AI now, if used correctly, there are some, definitely some caveats, which we will unpack a little bit later, but if used correctly, is going to commoditize knowledge. So what happens next? People have been worried about what their jobs are, what do they end up doing? And look, we went back and unpacked the history of the Industrial Revolution, weaving, looms, all of this stuff. But here's the key piece, which Barbara Oakley's paper sort of filled in, which is, what is it that we have to understand about how our brains work? So she went like back to basics at something like this, is back to like psychology. And she talks about these two systems, declarative system and the procedural system, as you can see. And what she sort of outlined is the declarative system, which is our conscious brains, system 2, as Danny Kahneman would say. Declarative system is our semantic memory and our episodic memory. And what the fascinating thing about this is, it's the hippocampus, it's the librarian of our brain. It is what we have really evolved as humans, is this ability to use language to be able to understand facts, put it together, and build our knowledge. This has been a 6 million year, journey for us to get to where we are today. Is this real power of declarative systems? We are pretty much the only creatures out there which have this superpower that we have been able to master using language to basically, learn facts about the world, these abstract concepts which we can bring together. The challenge is that knowledge has 2 components to it. So it's actually quick to learn. Compared to other things, it's really quick. You can read something in a sentence. I could tell you something. You will learn that. It is really hard to actually remember, because you actually have to go to the library, the hippocampus of the brain, which has to go and pull out this information. And look, we got to where we are. And, the knowledge era, especially over the last 30, 40 years, has been based upon this sort of big part of our system, to the point a lot of our education, a lot of the things that we talk about as learning, everything from school to work to L&D in corporations, is based upon declarative knowledge base. So this idea of knowledge. The challenge is, we've always known that declarative knowledge isn't the end all. It's actually a sort of a part of a journey. Because if you've ever chunked anything, if you've ever learned anything to an expert level, as we would sort of call it, you've actually pushed it to the procedural system. What is this procedural system? This procedural system is actually what we would be in system one. So it's unconscious to us. It was based upon the basal ganglia. It used to be based upon like what we call muscle memory, learning to juggle, driving a car, riding a bicycle, and most sports is this idea that, if you practice 10,000 hours, deep practice, you will be able to use this, this chunked knowledge, chunked skill, as we call it, in a way which is really fast. You don't even have to think about it. There's this beautiful video from Veritasium where they had Magnus Carlsen replay a classic sort of study from De Groot on chess. This idea that chess grandmasters can just look at a board and be able to understand the position, and he quickly position after position from a lot of his games, he could remember the game, the next move, what happened, who he was playing just by blink. And that is that power. And a lot of us have this sort of superpower, right? This ability of a particular skill in a particular domain that we have chunked to a level, and that's in your procedural system. The procedural system is different than the declarative. So not only is it unconscious, it is really slow to learn. It is one of the hardest things to learn, to chunk this stuff. And it's like quick to actually access. So procedural learning, procedural system is actually the old evolutionary piece. If you look at mammals, you look at other creatures out there, they use this procedural system. It's an older part of our brain, and it allows us to automate. Like, I love this research which talked about how, bunnies, when they're young, they sort of hop around. It looks like in a random pattern, but they practice it over and over again to eventually get it to this sort of unconscious procedural chunk learning. So when they're getting chased, they don't even give any indication. They just play this replica of this move. Like, you would have seen it on the soccer field. The people who can just manage to lose somebody just by doing a little wiggle or a dance or whatever it is, and you can get past people. So this idea of a procedural system, which was based upon physical skills, which we've always known. The example Barbara Oakley talks about is in driving. So driving is fascinating. We teach it through a declarative way, which is actually the problem we've seen with a lot of learning. And so, the driving instructor, is telling you all the different things, you have to turn your signal on, you have to start braking as you get in, then you start turning, look left, right, all of those things. It's given to you through declarative system. But we all know none of that is actually, how you drive today once you've chunked it. And we know this now, this journey. What Barbara Oakley's paper really mapped out is how do you move things from declarative to procedural? So it isn't just physical, which you kind of get a sense of, because chess is kind of this weird little half-breed where you kind of get it's a sort of a physical mental knowledge skill, and it kind of sits in this middle. But what we're starting to realize is, declarative memory, which is knowledge, and the what. And the procedural memory is about knowing and the how. As we look at knowledge being commoditized, the idea that we're going to have to build cognitive skills. So yes, physical skills is interesting, but cognitive skills, what's a cognitive skill? So like a chess grandmaster who can play at a level where they can just blink at the board and know what to move. The same thing with a lawyer, an accountant, some of the best sort of business strategists in the world. They've chunked so much, they've moved so much to their procedural system, that cognitive skill that they've learned. So in a world where knowledge is a commodity, we believe we need to start focusing on how do we build these cognitive skills and really use this idea of how do we move from the declarative system to the procedural system. So knowing what to knowing how, getting this into this chunked form has been the journey we've been on. So yes, declarative, being able to tap into knowledge and semantic information and facts. Look, this is still how schools teach. Even with all of this new research on space repetition and elaboration and all of these science-backed techniques of how you get better at declarative memory, that is just the tip of the iceberg. We have to work out how we actually do the deep work of cognitive skills, the skills which are going to be in the most demand very, very soon. And that's what we've been trying to solve. At some level, this is what everybody's been asking. Look, when AI comes along, my job's history, because you can feel it, you can sense it, whether you're a writer, you're a scientist, there's pieces that AI seems to be able to do. So what happens in that sort of world, how do you build to that higher level sort of procedural know-how? And that is what the big breakthrough was. So Barbara Oakley and team connected a dot for me, which allowed to understand how that place works.
And this is honestly one of the most exciting things. And as I go to this next slide, because this notion of going from bits to maps to models to sims, now this holds up whether it's knowledge or skills, right? So talk me through this and explain this for folks, because this is still rocking my world, the way that I keep thinking about, going from bits to maps to models to sims.
Look, I'm going to explain it through knowledge, because that's actually how I started building a lot of this frameworks, which is this idea, like when you learn things and they're just a bunch of facts, they're like this pile of Lego bricks, and you need to make something of it. So, the first time you learn to read, like you're literally learning the phonemes, the bits of words, the sounds of words. And you slowly get to a point where you can build it up into, that full word. Then you can build it up. You can start understanding sentences. Then you can start building it up so you can actually read this in sort of a very procedural system. What your brain's doing is taking this, so it seems like a pile of bricks, and creating structure out of it. So I call this maps. I use this idea of sort of the Lego instructions, which are these visual representations of how you pull these things together. How do you actually build a better model? So the funny thing is, the idea of what your brain's trying to do most of the time is create a more accurate model of one part of the world. Eventually, like, it would like to understand all parts of the world, but it's trying to understand this. So as facts come in, you're trying to reconnect it and be able to put it together. What does it mean? So this is a map. It's actually based upon the map making system, how we actually navigated the world in part of our brain. Place and grid scales is actually how this map making system works. This is actually the core functionality of how we organize knowledge. But the fascinating thing is, we don't stop at maps. We actually roll them up into things which are nearly 3D representations. So anything complex enough, like we can create equivalent of a 3D model of this entity in the world. So whether it's how an economy works, whether it's how an engine works, like these are things that we can understand. Like, doctors, some of the best doctors in the world can, model out, the human body at different parts and have a real deep expertise of this. But this is where, where we don't stop here. The real piece of it is when we can run sims. And this is the highest level. So I talk about this as bits is sort of 1D, and maps are these 2D sort of framing and structure. Models are these 3-dimensional, like we're putting this together so we understand something fairly well. But the real piece of this is, because what do we have memory for, is actually not to remember the past. It is actually to build sort of better predictive models. So if we ever experience this in the future, we can do something about it. So this 4D model, adding time to it and creating what we call sims, is the ultimate piece of this. So when you're at this highest level of expertise, when you understand something so well, you can run sims. One of the things is whether, Buffett can look at sort of the economy and understand capital markets and companies and run the sim of, hey, look, the market might be actually, ripe. It's going through this part of the cycle. Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, all of these like famous people who can model this out. Like, that is the sim. So at some level, we are moving always from bits to maps to models to sims. This also works in procedural. It's much in sort of muscle memory and skills as well. So knowledge is something, is how you chunk it. But when it comes to skills, whether you're a tennis player, whether you're a footballer, like I talked a lot about Lionel Messi and his ability, not only the skills on the pitch, but he can actually understand how the play is going to be. So he scans more times than any other player in history in a way that he can anticipate. So he walks around the pitch most of the time, but he's paying attention to the game. So whether it's Wayne Gretzky being able to understand where the puck's going to be and skating towards that, or Lionel Messi understanding what's going to happen on the pitch so he can get to the right place, kick the ball, pass it to somebody to score a goal. Like, these are all sort of these physical manifestations of sort of skill-based learning, that idea of being a grandmaster. So whether you're Magnus Carlsen, whether you're Lionel Messi, whether you're Wayne Gretzky, these are perfect examples, but we see it in the working world as well. And this idea of understanding how we move from bits to maps to models to sims is so critical to our ability to build these deep chunked models of the world.
And when you talk about that chunking, this is crazy to me, right? Because this notion of chunking, and you've talked about this for years. We talked about it extensively over the course of a number of Tectonic episodes last year. And this notion of chunking, and when you're chunking, and this is something that came out in this Barbara Oakley chapter, it's this notion of actually compressing your experiences, and this is almost you've likened it to that the famous Picasso series of drawings that go from a really lifelike bull all the way down to this totally minimalist single line. But help folks understand this notion of chunking, and how is it that when you go to these more streamlined and even abstract representations, that actually still holds up.
So the trick which your brain's worked out how to do is, initially when it experiences something. So look, I've got 2 kids learning to drive at the moment. And there's all this information that like the first time you sit in a car, there's so many different things you have to pay attention to. So not only the physical, you're paying attention to the road, I have to brake and to accelerate to the right things. Like these are all new skills. And this is a generation. My kids are, played video games, like some of the most complex video games and mastered them. But at some level, like driving the car, there's a sense of danger to it. And so there's a heightened anxiety. But here's the thing. It's like the first piece is like, you don't know what you have to pay attention to. So your brain tries to pay attention to everything. That feeling, if you can remember the first time you try and learn something, you don't even know what to pay attention to. Like you're trying to grasp at it. So what the brain does is this idea of like, I'm going to remember everything. I'm going to pay attention to everything, which is overwhelming. It overloads your working memory. You can't, there's only so many things. But as you start getting better at this and understanding, your brain starts like refining what it has to pay attention to. So once you've worked out how to, accelerate and brake and steer, you're kind of like, I don't need to think about that. That's been chunked, that's been pushed. But it's refining the model. It's refining the pieces of this. So it's like, if I see this, do this. So it's kind of like it already has it. So, a squirrel runs out in front of you. Yeah, you shouldn't brake. But my kids don't like killing animals, so they're probably going to brake. So this idea of like, that flash reaction. So, being able to put the brakes on, stop accelerating, put the brakes on, slow down, stop kind of thing. Like that sort of piece is now, I'm only paying attention to the right piece. But as you get to these higher and higher skills, what you will see is that the refined model of the world gets to this really sort of nearly abstract nature of what it pays attention to. Like when a chess grandmaster looks at a board, they're not looking at all the pieces separately. They can see it as a chunked pattern. Oh, I've seen this. There's a center structure like this. Oh, they're playing this. Even like understanding which opening which was played out, which is what led to this, allows them to understand so much about what's happening on the board. They actually use far less, mental energy and brain processing power because they have seen this and they can isolate the things to pay attention to. So this idea of chunking is actually your brain trying to get to the most efficient representation of only the most important pieces that it has to remember so it can do. So the working memory, it used to be plus or minus 7. The idea you can only hold 7 things in your working memory. In reality, it's closer to 4. But here's where it gets interesting. If you chunk up whole pieces of information, you can have whole games embedded as just one chunk because all the pieces as you unpack that. So this refinement. It's actually an efficient representation of information. Like to the point, we haven't got to even computer systems and memory systems which get to this and refine it to the levels that we need it to be. Like we're still working on some of this stuff, even some of the large language model stuff, the work which we're doing, but the brain does this so well. So as you say, I've been studying this idea of chunking, this idea of Herbert Simon and some of the research he did and how he called it chunking, based upon de Groot's experiments with chess players. It's something which I knew was critical. I knew it happened. And now we could actually represent it and how it happens. So there's this sort of concept which Barbara Oakley talks about is neural manifolds. How this is represented in the brain eventually gets to the most efficient sort of model. So it's using the least amount of neurons to be able to pack in so much information. So this idea of the master framework, knowledge and skills, is this sort of two two dimensions. So at one level, we want to move random bits of information to, refined and organized in maps, eventually into 3D models, and eventually being able to sim it. But at the same time, we are also chunking down. So if knowledge is really focused on that bits and maps, most of knowledge sits in this sort of, area of bits and maps. Look, I've seen stuff in physics and physicists and some of the stuff mathematics do where the knowledge is actually encapsulated in full-blown models and sims. But in general, most knowledge, whether it's law, whether it's economics, whether it's computer science at some level, it's normally in the bits to maps level. And what you do is once you've chunked it, you've chunked that, moved it to procedural, and you've refined it to its essence. So whether it's reading, whether it's understanding facts about finance, these are things which have been chunked. But skills, whether it's a physical skill or a cognitive skill, it is really starting to move into that models and sims. So whether it's a baseball, it's sort of somebody at bat who can understand the subtle movements of a pitcher so they can start swinging, because from the moment that ball leaves the pitcher's hand, there isn't enough time for the physics of the light to hit the back, hit your eye, get to the back of your brain, and make a decision and come back. So the idea is actually, a batter has to make the decision based upon the moves of the pitcher itself to be able to react in time. And that is sort of a chunk skill, that information and how it's represented and that ability to sim it. So this master framework is what we're starting to use to actually look at how do we actually help build these cognitive skills? What are the best ways to do it? So yes, experience is this perfect and beautiful way to do it. But here's the thing. Like, we're moving to a world where the skills are going to accelerate at a level that we won't have enough time to get the real world experience. And that's the thing which is challenging. So beautiful movie, Gran Turismo, which sounds cheesy, but it's an amazing movie. And it captures this idea of these kids playing this video game, which is a representation of real cars and real racing conditions, real tracks, the real physics behind it. And what they realized with these kids had more training and had chunked more things, if we use our terminology, and built better sims in their head because of the fact that spent more time in the game than a driver who only gets experience when they drive on tracks. So even if they drove every single day, guess what somebody can do in a video game? They can play for longer. There isn't as much danger. They can try things so they can learn faster. So this idea of Gran Turismo is this perfect example of like, how do we actually start training at that level for the core skills, especially as skills start accelerating because this world is starting to move faster and faster.
Well, there's a ton more to unpack from that preprint chapter. You've been digging into it, as you said, for a month. We're going to keep mining it and folding it in along with all of these other insights. But when it comes to that sort of declarative practice and chunking skills, well, we've created something for you, Kez, that we like to call Speed Jam. And Speed Jam is a deceptively simple premise. It's simply that I have pulled together a six-pack of questions for Kez to answer in 3 minutes or less. And before we dive into this Speed Jam, Kez, when we were prepping earlier for the show, you said, I hope people enjoy it because I don't think they understand what this actually is for me. Before we do this Speed Jam, where you've got 6 questions, diabolical questions that I've come up with, and you have no idea what these questions are, and you're going to have to answer them in 3 minutes or less, tell me what kind of cognitive skills you're practicing.
Look, the ability to be able to look at a question, pull everything up. So here's the thing, like, I'm pulling stuff from my hippocampus, hoping I've got enough stuff chunked that I can build it up and do it procedurally, and then be able to articulate it in a way to answer the questions. Like, these are questions I've not seen. Maybe I've thought about them, maybe I haven't thought about them, but to be able to think on your feet. Look, if anybody's seen somebody ability to answer, whether it's your PhD orals or as a consultant pitching to somebody who has these really complex, or VCs, throwing these curveballs at you, like, that's the feeling you have. So this is like pitching. This is like, I'm a batter at base and you're the fastest pitcher. These questions are coming at me and I have to respond. So look, I will challenge anybody, like have somebody come up with six really complex questions and see what you can do in 3 minutes.
Well, let's see what you can do in 3 minutes. Plus, it gives me a chance to enjoy a little popcorn and my gin tonic. So here we go, Kez. It is the Intelligence Day special Speed Jam. All right, what's the automation fallacy? Why won't AI take all the jobs? What's the best AI tool? How should people use AI? Why study 1978 to 1988? And what is intelligence? Take it away, Centaurian.
Oh, geez. All right. What's the automation fallacy? Look, this is really interesting. So, as you think about all of these people talk about AI and agentic workflows, look, I love the agent stuff. I've been playing with it. Anybody following me will know that. But here's the thing. Most people are doing this to be able to automate what of the work which is here today. They believe that AI is going to automate, processes, work, jobs, and they also think that it's going to happen fairly quickly. Look, we do this with every single technology. Look, I went back and looked at James Besson's work on unpacking what happened in weaving. The power loom in 1800 was sort of invented. It actually took 80 years to get to a point where there was enough of the weaving process which was automated. It took 80 years as you move from like one sort of power loom, which one person was operating, to eventually to a point where one weaver was actually operating after 5 different looms simultaneously. And it took even longer to get to a factory, which was actually automating all of this stuff. Look, automation is not going to take 80 plus years in the AI era, but it's going to be harder than you think because there's always things which can't be done, at which point you need experts in the process. There's always going to be new auxiliary jobs. We've seen it as software ate the world. Software didn't just start and everything was automated. Like a software program didn't just replace wholeheartedly people, but it did actually take some of the drudgery out of it. The automation fallacy, as I see it today, is people assuming that we can just automate everything away with a blink of an eye, because I believe that this is where the heart of where our skills are going to go as we start looking at this. Look, why won't AI take all the jobs? I've kind of answered that. Look, AI is going to not only be able to eventually automate. So I look at this idea of you take something as a non-routine job, which takes a lot of cognitive processing, it turns into routines through codification, and then it gets automated. That whole process takes a long time. Look, it's going to take a while to get there, but here's the real trick. Not only is it going to need new skills to be able to run the automation, the factory, and there's actually a level, but there's a cognitive ladder which we climb because there's new non-routine jobs which are created by it. What's the best AI tool? Look, at the moment, it really is dependent on what are you using it for. O3 Pro, I use it in a very particular way. Deep research around the stuff I'm doing, but Claude does certain things better. Coding is really interesting. We've been playing with Lovable on coding. How should people use AI? Look, the way of using AI is to make sure you think first, use everything you bring to the table, understand who you are before you use AI. The study between 1978 and 1988 was Shoshana Zuboff looking at the history of PC and what happened. What is intelligence?
Oh, I think I finally got you. There you go. Oh man, you know what, Kez? Look, that was so unfair. That was really, really so unfair of me. But look, you have been cramming so much stuff, diving into so many things. We're about to dive into some more things here as we hop on the Twain train. But thank you for giving it your best shot. Like I said, I stacked it. It was unfair, but look, who would I be if I teed you up with some softballs on Intelligence Day? But it is time for our favorite ride. That is hopping on the Twain train. Toot toot, and Twain, of course, is an acronym, and it stands for This Week in AI News. And look, if we're being honest, because in theory we should cover 6 months worth of AI news, but that's not exactly how we approach it. It's this promise, this prospect, like the famous Mark Twain quote that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So what we've been looking at, and actually this is from this week in AI news. This is actually a LinkedIn article that you just published yesterday on this. Okay, strong opinions loosely held. It was just a terrible. I thought it was an absolutely atrocious paper, clickbaity, that MIT put out. Your brain on ChatGPT, accumulation of cognitive depth when using AI assistant for essay writing tests, basically saying AI is making you stupid. And you tore into it. It seemed like a terrible study. Because hit me with a few thoughts on this MIT study and what it says to you and some of the patterns that you're seeing from a historical perspective.
Look, it was interesting because, like I said, it was clickbaity. Everybody was talking about it. And the fascinating thing, Joshua Gans, an economist who I follow, had this really interesting take on it, which was he basically said, whatever you believed before, you just saw this paper or article about it and you walked away believing the same thing. So if you believed that AI was going to make you stupid, you believed it. If you didn't believe that, you basically, tore into it and basically they were asking, stupid questions, and that's not really a sign of your cognitive decline. It's like, even Joshua Gans kind of got into it a little bit of, hey, you would use AI to be able to unpack it. Look, one of the fascinating things was realizing that this 206-page sort of research paper was definitely up there, even in the kind of papers that I read, and I realized that most people had used AI to unpack it, to the point the researchers themselves to write the paper had used AI, because Joshua Gans points out there's this section in there. He goes, did anybody actually read this? Because it's pure AI, like hype talking. And, it was fascinating. So even the conclusion paragraph, which, they had used AI to get to, was fascinating. But look, I was super skeptical. I was definitely not expecting what I found. Look, the science behind it was actually well designed. Look, I could argue with this idea. So they had basically what it came down to. There are three different groups. One group was going to be you could use LLMs. Second group is you could use search technology. So you can go to the web and be able to pull some stuff up. And the last group was you have to just use your brains. And they had to answer these sort of SAT type questions. So these are like challenging questions. As Joshua Gans said, it's like, not sure how going to the web to answer some of these questions was actually going to be helpful, because these were sort of philosophical. They were really trying to get to like, how do you think about such and such? What would you do in this sort of situation? But what was fascinating was these questions were challenging. And, a lot of people, especially in the LLM group, used the technology well. It was much easier. It was frictionless in a lot of ways. They enjoyed doing it. They got to really good answers, much better answers than the other two groups. But here's where the trick comes in. It's like the search group, like, that wasn't great. It wasn't great with the answers they got to. They were kind of in the middle. But the brain-only group had to work much harder. They actually felt more ownership, which you would expect. They got to like good answers, like really good, solid answers, not as good as the AI group. But here's where the interesting piece was. They understood so much more about the topic because they had actually thought about it. So there was this question, which I wasn't a big fan of, which was like one of the tests they did was like, can you actually recall quotes from the article you wrote? Look, I'd be challenged to be able to pull out quotes from things I wrote myself. And, it wasn't sort of great, but, definitely the people in the LLM group couldn't really pull things out. And the search group, same position. The brain group did a little bit better, but I would have gone with something like, tell me what the essence of the argument was. What was the point of what you got to and what you wrote together with it, either with AI or by yourself? So, because I think that would have been a better way of looking at it. But as these three groups, one of the most fascinating pieces of it was, as they looked at the brains, and they had this really interesting analysis to be able to understand how the connectivity of the brain and how the brain was being activated, which was a fascinating bit of the study. But what they did was actually they switched the groups. So the LLM group, which initially used LLM first, had to then answer the same questions through using, the brains. And the brain-only group had to answer the same question using LLM. And they were monitoring the brains, and it like the brain only group, that brain lit up like a Christmas tree. So as they were brought up with this question again and had to respond to it and could use LLMs, their brain was already alight. So they was bringing all of this stuff because they thought about it, they detailed, they've written an essay about it. Now they could augment it with LLMs. So the kind of way they used LLMs was so much more powerful. Look, the LLM group who then flipped to using the brains, they struggled. Yes, the question was familiar, but it wasn't familiar enough. It was definitely like, I paid attention in class, but I'm not really sure what it was all about. I read the cliff notes to the thing. It was that kind of sense, and they struggled with it. And look, at some level, this was the pushback, the critique was, it's like, isn't that obvious? But look, that switch condition was so powerful. Yes, it was a small sample size of about only 18, but it fitted something which I've believed for a long time. To the point, the framework which we ended up building over the last 2 years is this idea of like, how do you think first before you go to prompting? Because look, as the AIs got more and more powerful, one of the things I started getting uncomfortable about was it was starting to hallucinate, and in ways that only I could tell because I was an expert in the subject. So when you look at the neuroscience of motivation, something I studied for over a decade, like when we ask it, it pulls up self-determination theories. Like, I know enough about self-determination theory, and look, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, but it didn't actually take into account a lot of the new research or the neuroscience or the things which actually go beyond self-determination theory, which is the thing I was trying to write about and explain. And this is the hallucination, but it's only somebody who's an expert who could actually have unpacked it. So this idea I realized was, if I run to AI, I'm going to have to work much harder on the back end. So I realized that if I did the thinking up front before I went to AI, it was so much more powerful. And seeing the neuroscience, seeing how the connectivity of the brain and how it lights up was a lot to do with the hypothesis of the framework and methodology. The toolkit we ended up developing and testing over the last 2 years is actually based upon this concept. But this, I think everybody gets it. Like, if you use AI as an answer machine, you're not going to get much out of it. Look, if you use it as glorified Google, it's not going to be that great. Look, there's a lot of things I love running to AI for. Like, it just helped me fix, espresso machine, an old espresso machine, which I couldn't find all the information on. It found it. It actually walked me through what I had to fix it. Same thing with, there's this new pet vacuum, which we built, and I could just take a photo of it. And it just walked me through every step of the process of how I use it. And like, that's a good use case, but like that at some level is just the evolution of where Google was going already, or YouTube and all the rest of it. But here's the thing, that is just scratching the surface of what you can use it for, because the way to use it to augment your thinking as a researcher, as a thinker, as somebody who's an innovator, as a business strategist, the way I use AI is so much more powerful if I do the thinking up front. As me as an expert, before this, as we talked about the last Tonic, this idea of O1 Pro just launched, it is for pros. So if you are a professional, you are an expert, you will know something really deeply, this is the tool which can augment you. But you can't go there for answers. You have to be able to bring your knowledge, your skills, your superpowers, the things you've chunked, the skills that you have, to be able to use it effectively. And that's what really this paper came down to. Look, there was a lot of pieces of this which I liked. I think there's going to be further research to be able to play it out. Unfortunately, how it played out through the media and social media seems to be just like it is a mirror. It is an echo chamber. It is just, if you believe one thing, you walked away believing it. Look, I took it apart. I used the core thinking that I have. I read it. I used AI to take it apart. I challenged my beliefs. I put my hypothesis out there, put my biases. And look, one of the key things is, yes, it validated something I believed before, but I tested it, and I'm going to keep testing it. I'm going to look for more research going forward. But this seemed to be able to give light to something I've been working on for like 2 years.
And also, in terms of things that you've been working on for a long time, and this week in AI news, we have to give a shout out to the Kyndryl Institute, Tom Rourke, Abigail Pierce, everybody at Kyndryl. We got to meet so many of them at the Reinvention Summit in Dublin back in April that Aidan McCullen organized. It was absolutely phenomenal. And in terms of what you were talking through, Kez, we used all of that, all of our thinking to craft this article about what follows DeepSeek, which is featured featured in the inaugural Kindle Institute Journal, this awesome immersive reading experience that you can check out online. Just go ahead and Google or use Perplexity or your favorite LLM tool to find the Kindle Institute Journal. It is a really, really cool thought leadership experience that is going beyond static PDFs, something that you and I have been evangelizing and promoting and practicing for years. And it's just so fantastic to see the kind of thinking that we've done. And as you said, we didn't just go to O1 Pro and say, hey, what does DeepSeek mean? We went back and forth. We built up our knowledge, our K-bits as we call it. We built up our questions and our Q-bits to ultimately get to a far, far better answer in terms of this article, our point of view, and how to actually think first, prompt later, and ultimately think with machines to generate a higher quality project and product. So that's a little bit of this week in AI news. I am so excited, Kez, to share some tectonic tool tips here, because this is building on really what you pulled together over the last year, the notion of Centaurian thinking systems. And our tool tips are what we actually built on top of this. So we went from just taking, this notion of System 1 and System 2 that Danny Kahneman coined, and thinking fast and slow, and created these persona cards. So, Kez, talk a little bit about getting things done, and let's start with the personas. What is this tool, and what are we doing with it, and how can people use it?
Look, as you sort of flashed up, and anybody who looked at the Christmas lecture we put together talks about my sort of thinking in systems. So this idea of I built on Danny Kahneman's System 1, System 2. System 2 is our conscious brain. System 1 is our unconscious. The intersection between those two things is really powerful. So as I thought about how you think with machines, I realized that if I could extend that metaphor and actually start looking at all the different systems. So one of the key things as we start thinking about personas is not only like, how do you think between System 1 and System 2, is what are you an expert in? What is the knowledge you have? What are the skills? We call them superpowers. These things you've chunked, so you have these superpowers. The motivational style, we would talk about motivational intelligence, but this idea of motivations and kryptonite, because one of the core things is if you understand what kind of thinker you are, what kind of expert you are. We have these archetypes, which we built out as part of this work, which we've done with this client. But this idea of, a visionary, a builder, sort of an analyst, or a, creator, these are all different types. And what they are is sort of archetypes of different thinking styles, and they have different superpowers, different knowledge bases. So starting with the persona card allows you to go like, who am I? What do I already know? What am I really strong at? What am I weak at? Because starting with that allows you to start understanding how you should use systems. And, look, we tie System 0 based upon Andy Clark with, again, a huge innovation in our evolution is this idea. We're the only creature in the world who can think outside our heads. So whether it's books, Post-it notes, scribbles on the cave wall, to all the way to mural and digital things, we can do thinking outside our heads. I love the story of mathematicians who are the biggest users of external spaces. And this idea that there's in this one of these math buildings, it's only 3 floors, and inside the elevator, there is a little blackboard, just in case you have that, in the 2 minutes you spend in that, like you have this idea and you have to scribble it down, which if you've ever known a mathematician, that happens all the time. So this idea of being able to think in a external passive device is one of the core skills you have to learn. Look, what I say when I say think first, prompt later is do that thinking between your System 1 and System 2 before you ever go to a System 3. System 3 is the LLMs, the AI which we're starting to use, these idea of Centaurian. So build that expertise. And look, we built this framework. So instead of going to all the prompts and all the different things that we designed over the years, we chunked them up into jobs to be done. How do you use AI? To the point, each one of these things actually has complex prompt templates which we can build behind these. But the idea was to be able to use these, whether it's System 1, System 2, your persona, understanding your superpowers. How do you actually think between your conscious brain and unconscious, incubation, brainstorming, question storming, all the way to how do I think with a notebook or a digital system or a second brain system which you've built. But then how do you use AI? Now you've built up your knowledge, brought your expertise and your superpowers and your skills. Now you can go to AI and use it in the right way. So this is a toolkit to understand what we said is like, if you are changing how you think, how you work, you need a toolkit to map it out. So this is a way of flowing out how thought flows and workflows come together. So whether it's a job which you do solo, like research, or how we build, wrote 2 books in a very short period of time. When we did the Kindle article, that was chunked so much of research, and using AI to be able to validate the research and help me sort of pull out pieces of it, big quotes, source it. But the writing of the ideas, going back and forth. It started with system 1 and system 2. It started with my system 0. I have notebooks full of ideas, and then working with AI to refine it, and then using it as an editorial assistant, right? So this idea of a system, we have thought flow cards, which connect systems together. This is a toolkit for learning how to think with machines. Look, these are 2 we added in version 2 of the beta product, which is the realization that when you get something out, especially something as powerful as something like the DeepSeek article or books, is you need to be able to expert check it, because you need somebody with the level of expertise to be able to validate if this is true or not. And you also have to error check it, because this is what the power of this tool we're using. So we are moving into a new world of how we work, how we think, how we use these tools. And this framework, this toolkit, is allowing people to be able to understand how to map out and model out how do you think with machines, getting things done.
And I would be remiss if I didn't point out the physical cards that we have created. We've got Getting Things Done. That is the sexy box, and these cards, and Kez, we are going to be making these available at an internet near you very, very soon. So keep an eye on, of course, on LinkedIn in particular, because that's where we share so much information. Because you mentioned our books, this is the PDF, but again, I'll go solo and show. Here is the ThinkWeek Primer that we custom created for the Reinvention Summit in Dublin, Ireland. This is the other side. Choose Your Own Inflection. It's two books in one. And of course, we have the PDFs available. Because you want to share a little bit about how it is that we wrote and self-published our first 2 books in about 2 weeks, and how we didn't just have AI do it.
Look, we had to bring like close to 30 years of research. So I've been working on ThinkWeeks. ThinkWeeks is, this idea of what Bill Gates, like I was inspired by Bill Gates and his reading weeks, and this idea that he turned into ThinkWeeks. He used to go away to this cabin in the woods, bring a pile of books and research papers, and like give himself time to really think together. So I got obsessed with this idea. I read it in a number of biographies back in the 90s, and I was like, I want to learn how to do this. Like, what does he do? Like, I'm a big reader, but it's like, how do you bring all these things together? So I've been, for the last 30 years, like testing, experimenting, researching how our brain works, how to build different tools. Look, he has not shared how he does what he does. I've been going back to neuroscience and cognitive science and experimenting with this. So how do you actually do it? So we pulled together all of my notes, all of my experiences, all of my research over 30 years, and had to start making sense of them. And we used AI to help us get to, really like a streamlined version of it. Because what we wanted to do for the Reinvention Conference is we wanted the people to be able to use it as ThinkWeek. If you're investing all that time to fly to a conference and be there, it's like, how do you actually prime yourself? How do you actually use your brain? What do you do before it? What do you read during it? How do you get to the questions? How do you connect with the right people? We took all of the research. So whether it's a commentary play, which is an ideation creativity technique, whether it's question storming, how do you use your different systems, system 1, system 2, question storming, what do you read? So this content of what you read and put in your brain, how do you know what you're actually trying to solve? Who are you going to communicate with and how? This was a how-to guide of how to do a Think Week while we were at Ireland, and we wanted to get this out there. So everything I've learned over 30 plus years, you helped me pull this together and get this. And then we used AI and went back and forth, worked with a designer to design it into a tool. What you will see in this is something which I've been doing for a long time. You see wide margins and these like colorful little things that are, because one of the core things, understanding how our memories work, our memories have a geographic component to it. So when you scribble in the margins of a book, marginalia, I do this all the time, you're more likely to remember it because it's connected to something unique. So this idea of like, this is a notebook, this is a tool for thinking, and you've seen all the books out there, like whether it's habit journals and all the rest of it. This is a type of journal, but instead of having blank pages, you write in the margin, and there's neuroscience and cognitive science behind it. We built it this way in a very particular way. Think in the margins, give people the tools, give people the exercises, give people the way to how to connect people. So that's the ThinkWeek side of it. We taught them how to do ThinkWeeks. But here, then we flip it.
Well, then we flip it, and then we go into what we call choose your own inflection. So we are living through multiple inflection points that are happening all at once right now. Peter Layden, of course, is writing about the Great Enlightenment, how we're at inflection points with AI and with clean energy and with biotechnology and we took a slice of the inflection points from throughout history that you have collected. You've got a library of 500 or so of these, and we brought in, I don't know, I guess about 80 of them into the Choose Your Own Inflection side. And we've got some journeys here, but you and I are unabashed Gen Xers, and we grew up with choose your own adventure books. And so what this side actually has, as you said, it is designed to be written in. This is a System Zero tool that we hope that people will make personal by thinking through it. But what we actually have in the PDF version is pretty interesting, is you've got these dynamic little links here. So you can go from the baby boom to the hippies, and maybe you want to follow the path to how the hippies gave rise to the personal computer and the microcomputer revolution. Maybe you want to hop on the economic path to the ICT revolution, the eruption phase. Maybe you want to see how that led to the internet, the network of networks, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So this is an amazing adventure. The physical version, well, it's a little bit of a puzzle. This was a limited print run. Only folks who were at the Reinvention Summit in Dublin at the end of April got a physical copy. We had a happy hour for a small group of folks who really bought in early to the ThinkWeek primers. We called them our primer posse. It was amazing. And Kez, this is something, as you said, you've been doing ThinkWeeks for your entire adult life. And this was the first time where you really got a chance to not only share ThinkWeeks with people, but this notion of inflection points, and how is it that you can actually start training and chunking the patterns of change? How can you start to spot inflection points on the horizon, these macro signals of change? Because everything is connected, just like John Weir said. You try to pick up one thing and you find that it's connected to everything else in the universe. So this is really helping folks understand the connections across inflections. Because anything else before you share your strong opinion, loosely held, for this very special Intelligence Day edition of Tectonic, the AI Thought Show?
Look, to build a book, an interactive around all the research I've been doing around macro signals, social, technology, economics, politics, the mapping, the history, like I've been teaching myself to understand inflection points by studying history, being a student of history, really mapping this all out. And like Scott, like you said, Scott, like I've got hundreds and hundreds of these things, but I wanted to give a taste in this interactive journal to give people a sense of like, how do you think? How does inflection happen? This gradually and suddenly, how did we get to some of these ideas? Because I took all of my research and connected them. Look, inspired by, famous writers who've done similar things before, but to make it into an interactive, make it into something which allows us to be able to think and train on understanding inflection points. That was one of the core things. We did a talk on 10x thinking and how to see around corners, and built an early warning system using AI. Look, that was all together for the reinvention conference, and that was beautiful.
Well, we are so proud of it. I just spotted a couple of comments. Have to shout out, of course, our prompt thinker, Loman Harley. Think first, prompt later, brother. And Tanya, stay tuned because we have quite a tooltip for you. Actually, you helped me remember the one tooltip that I forgot to share. And Tanya, we're going to be sharing out this link very shortly. This is the MVP of what we are calling, initially we called it the Centaurian Persona Creator, and it is going to be rebranded as Mojo Me because what we have created using Lovable. And Lovable is absolutely one of our tectonic tooltips for this Intelligence Day special. It is an incredible vibe coding application. We were able to build this in a matter of a couple of hours between coming up with the idea as a collective. You used AI to come up with design documents. You flipped those design documents to Noah Frank, our boy wonder, our whiz at vibe coding. And we turned around this initial MVP of a persona modeler using Lovable in a matter of a couple of hours. We are building it out, fleshing it out. So Tanya, we are going to help you and everybody identify their personas, their thinker types, their motivations, their fears, and so much more. So stay tuned. We are going to have an absolutely phenomenal application, and you can bet your bippy it's going to be built with Lovable. But before we wrap up this extended, of course, this is our show, Kez. We do what we want, and we could not do it without ending with one of your trademark strong opinions, lostly held. And I am also looking forward to using Veo to create some updated graphics. You can only make 3 a day, and I had like 3 shots to come up with that intro video. But Kez, strong opinions loosely held, that is one of our strongly held principles and values. And you have some rather strong opinions loosely held around education in general. But what I would love to tee you up for, my friend, is, Kez, what are your strong opinions loosely held about the 2 sigma fallacy?
So the 2 sigma fallacy is this idea that, if you could have a one-on-one teacher, a tutor, like your results would be 2 sigma. So this idea of 2 standard deviations different in results. So having personal teachers. So this is, if you could have the smartest, best teacher coaching you one-on-one, and look, this was only available to the richest of the rich and throughout history. And, whether you're Alexander the Great, having the ability to bring, the best teacher with you at all times, this has been something rare. But the idea was, and I think it's Bloom who basically came up with this, is this idea that there's a 2 sigma difference if you can have a one-on-one coach. The problem is this builds on this concept that humans have this really great sort of social teaching piece of it. Look, a lot of animals, especially mammals, teach the young in some ways, like coach them a little bit, but it's mostly in play. Humans have been able to use language, and the declarative system, if you remember at the start, is this idea of like we've been working ways to be able to share our knowledge. A lot of it's still declarative, a lot of it's still taught, a lot of it's like creating, hopefully better maps, beyond just the bits. And this idea of having a one-on-one teacher is so much better than, like the classrooms, the factory model of teaching, which we've had, because that's the only way we could scale it. Look, the fallacy is, and we've seen it with, writers like, Matt Bean talking about a skill code. He went back to this idea that actually human apprenticeship and coaching is the best way to learn something. Actually, it's not, especially in this day and age. Look, it got us here. It got us through a couple of million years. It evolved, especially as we added language to it. We have been standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, standing on the shoulders of genius, and we've been using our declarative system and building knowledge and sharing it, and teachers have been the forefront of it. But the reality is, when you break into what is the 2 sigma piece, there's a piece which is about learning, and there's a piece which is about, the psychological support, the motivation, understanding and engaging with the, with the student. one of the things that we're realizing is AI is actually really good at that. And AI can do a much better job. Look, a teacher together with the AI, which actually understands everything the student's gone through, could actually be something that could help them be able to motivationally coach and teach and spend their time really, helping the student get through this. The metacognition piece of it could be really done by humans. But when we get to knowledge, as we think about chunking it down, as we get to the cognitive skills we're going to have to learn. Look, it isn't like kids trying to play some of the most complex video games in the world go, hey, I need a teacher. Look, they get a coach sometimes, but most of the times they're sharing information on videos and Twitch and learning. That's how they're learning. It's experiential. It's playing the games, creating training grounds. We are moving into a world where we need to stop thinking of education as declarative. We have to stop thinking about it as only something a human can teach somebody else, because we don't have time for that. Let's do something which humans are really good at, which is engaging the student in unique ways, tying into their motivation, but use AI to be able to get a full map of all the things that a student's actually done. Use AI to be able to create games, to be able to design these new skill-based games. Look, the 2 Sigma fallacy is we can get to 3 Sigma actually if we can use AI and humans in the right way, because it was a scaling problem. We basically created schools which scaled teachers, but teachers still couldn't quite get to that one-on-one connection or understand a student at the level that they could. Look, when they get really close and they can do their work, it's amazing what they can do. So let's forget about them being the teacher of knowledge and declarative systems. Let's use AI in the right way. Use AI to help augment the teacher, help augment the student, and use this really new, unique way to teach these cognitive skills which we're moving towards, and use something which we've been building on for the last 30 years, which is games. Games are actually the best way. So going back to understanding how animals learn their cognitive skills, we are moving back to that world. So we are going to create skill-based training games which allow us to learn at the level. So Gran Turismo for driving, what happens if you can do that to learn, become a tax consultant or a financial analyst or a doctor? Like, this is where we're starting to go. Like, where the worlds of technology, as AI, VR, AR, all of these things are coming together, we have the ability to go beyond something which we couldn't do before. So let's go back to our roots of humanity, not just humanity, but actually evolutionary history of how do we train through play to learn the cognitive skills of the future. That's a strong opinion, loosely held.
And given that strong opinion, loosely held, Kez, I think somebody should start a company around that, don't you?
I think that could be a good idea.
Well, stay tuned, because I think we might have to take a. Actually, maybe we'll take another little hiatus from Tectonic and just go get some VC and start a company around that or something.
Just wait. We'll be right back.
Well, that does it for this very special Intelligence Day edition of Tectonic, the AI Thought Show with Kez and Scott, joining you from Waynesville, North Carolina, gateway to the Great Smoky Mountains, along with my best friend and partner in possibility, Kez Sam Panther. I'm Scott Wolfson, your friendly, curious human, reminding you, stay augmented, our friends.
Stay augmented. Cheers.
Cheers.